Welcome to Around the World with Dane Waters. I'm your host, Dane Waters. Thanks for being here today. Lots going on in the world, so let's get started. Trump's inauguration happened yesterday. Whole world's watching. So what does it mean for the world? Over the coming weeks, each segment we will kind of talk about, what he's focused on, what's happening, his executive orders and his foreign policy especially. But two things interesting came out of his speech yesterday. One is that the Panama Canal. Listen, I lived in Panama for a while. I don't know why anybody would actually want the Panama Canal, but in theory, he believes that it's been taken over by the Chinese. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Panama Canal. It is a very critical economic source for the world and for America. So that'll be one thing interesting. And I just think it's unique that the President of the United States uses, his inauguration speech to talk about that, as well as renaming the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America. I lived on the Gulf of Mexico for a while, so now I guess I'll say I'll live on the Gulf of America. Who knows? But there's a lot going on. It's a new dawn. It's a new age. It's going to not just impact American and domestic issues. It will definitely be foreign policy wise. It will definitely set the tone. I have two guests today, and both guests will be talking about what the impact of the new Trump administration may have on some of the issues and efforts taking place in their respective parts of the world. In addition to that, what else is happening in the world? Is there anything else happening in the world? Yes, we have the peace agreement in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas, and my first guest, we will talk about that. And then after that, we're going to have a very interesting conversation about propaganda and violence. What is the nexus between the two? Globally, and how there'll just be a kind of a random conversation. We're going to kind of figure out how social media plays into that, written word plays into that, and all of that, and how it impacts what's going to happen over the next 4 years as well. Anyway, thanks for being with me around the world with Dane Waters, and let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with our first guest. Thank you. Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. As we were just talking about before the break, there's a lot going on in the world. And as we're seeing on the TV, what's happening in the Middle East and happening in Israel is forefront on the TV screens. So I'm very, very honored today to have with me Asher Westropp-Evans, if I said that correctly. So welcome, Asher. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Dane. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you back. So kind of fill us in on what's happening with the peace. I mean, I don't know, is it called ceasefire, peace agreement? What is the right way to say what's happening?
Yeah, and I did note your term in the sort of preamble here. Definitely what we're talking about here at the moment is still very much a ceasefire. We are a long way from anything resembling a true and final peace agreement in any sense. This is just phase one of what at the moment is considered a three-phase operation. At the moment, we're talking about getting those first 33 hostages. We're talking about the women, the children, elderly and infirm, excluding men that are considered of fighting age, ranging from 18 to about 50 or so. We're talking about getting those initial hostages back. Again, we still don't know if they're alive, dead, what state they may be in. After now nearly 16 months of fighting, it's unknown exactly what condition Israel would be receiving these in. But this is the initial phase we're talking about. Phase two is still yet to be formally negotiated, let alone phase three, which is the longer-term plan. So unfortunately, Dan, we're a long way off from anything resembling a full-blown peace agreement.
So talk to me about how many hostages there are. And how many, you said 33 are in the first part of the agreement?
Exactly right. So we've still got, after the return of Emily, Romy, and Gonen, we've still got 94 hostages being held by Hamas in their terror dungeons. As I said earlier, we do not know the state that these people are in. I mean, and we're talking about hostages ranging up into their 80s in age and down right to Kfir and Ariel Bibas. Kfir taken at just 9 months of age. Now, unfortunately, would have seen the second birthday in Hamas captivity, if indeed he is or isn't still alive, because we frankly do not know. The Red Cross has never been allowed in to see the hostages. We don't know the state that any of them may truly be in. There are a few signs of life here and there, but realistically, it's unknown. So that's what we're talking about right now. 94 hostages still remaining in Hamas captivity, as they've done so since October 7th. And this is the goal of the deal. Again, originally to get those 33 back, women, children, elderly, and infirm. And then the second phase of the deal, which would only take place after about 6 weeks or so, we would be getting the remaining male hostages. Again, though, unknown what state they would be returning in, alive, dead, well, sick. It really is unknown at this point.
Let me ask you about that. So let's say that, I mean, if you look at the devastation of Gaza, I mean, it's hard to imagine that any of the hostages have survived, but the reality is, luckily, we do know 33 have. So what happens if it turns out that a majority of them are no longer alive? Is that going to impact the second and third phases of this?
No, I mean, just to be clear as well, Dan, we don't actually know that 33 are alive. Within that 33 initially, it is unknown the state that any of them are in truly. Those are just considered the sort of primary category that are even being considered for release ahead of phase two. Again, those sort of what are considered technically fighting age men, which would constitute the second phase. Now, in terms of how that might shape the deal and what could happen, I mean, Israel, as always, values the return of its citizens, alive, dead, in whatever state they may be. It is critical for Israel that we get our citizens back, and that will continue to be a goal no matter what state they may now be in. In terms of how it impacts things for the Palestinian side, under the current auspices of the deal, if those hostages are alive, then Israel will release around 50 prisoners, Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli prisons for various crimes and deeds. They will release 50 of those if they are alive, and 30 if they are being exchanged for a body, that is for a deceased hostage. So the numbers will vary depending on who is alive, who is dead. But frankly, for Israelis, this is a very difficult conversation we are facing. We're talking about our loved ones that we still don't know, still have no idea the state in which they're in at this stage. And again, as we said, we can't even verify that those 33 initial hostages that are set to be released are in fact what state they may be in at all. It is simply an unknown at this stage.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I had a guest on my show. He was a prisoner of war. It was a Russian prisoner of war. He was a Ukrainian soldier. And when I was just in Ukraine, and I visited several prisoner of war exchange locations, and it's hard to imagine what these people go through. I mean, it's just devastating. But luckily, the families at least they'll have some closure. They'll at least know what's going on, and which is very, very important. So just so I'm clear, to get all the hostages back, what is it? Walk me through again, because I'm a little slow. I'm from Alabama, so forgive me. So you have phase 1, 2, and 3. So in theory, when do you expect to get the last hostage?
Still, it's not entirely known when phase 2 would be completed. As we say, the goal of the current ceasefire agreement is that phase 2 would be negotiated throughout the 6 weeks of phase 1. But right now, what we have on the books in some sort of formalized agreement in terms of phase 1 is this 6-week drip feed of hostages. I mean, really, we've been calling it here the sickest game show you could possibly imagine, where each week families are going to have to wait and hope that their loved ones may be returned to them, may be alive, may be dead, maybe mutilated. As you said, the horrors that they may have witnessed over what is now 472 days, and by then it'll be closer to 500 days of captivity. We can only imagine what they may have been through. But over the course of those 6 weeks, the idea is that phase 2 will be finalized and negotiated, and there will be exchanges made, both in terms of hostages for prisoners, but also with the goal being of Israel's steady withdrawal out of Gaza, moving away from key strategic areas. What's going to replace Israel in those areas? I mean, obviously Hamas would like to return to power and take back its authoritarian militant control of the Gaza Strip. Israel is determined that will not happen, and that another form of government may be put in place. What that government would constitute, I won't speculate here. There's a lot of negotiations with international players, varied stakeholders from the likes of Egypt, Qatar, Jordan, the UAE, the US, of course, and others involved in those negotiations. So it would be a determined process over a number of remaining weeks and months. And then, as I said, eventually the idea would be to lead to phase 3, which would be the long-term reconstruction of Gaza once all the hostages are released under a new government that hopefully isn't Hamas and doesn't have the same militant tendencies that the Hamas government has shown.
I mean, that's the whole question: is what is the long-term solution? Basically also with with Lebanon and Hezbollah, in in the north, and then dealing with Hamas and then Iran. So let me ask this: so is the two-state solution basically dead? I mean, is that just the reality of the situation?
I mean, Dan, realistically, we don't know at the moment. There is so much up in the air, as you just mentioned. Of course, Lebanon, Hezbollah in the north. You've got militias acting out of Iraq and still to some degree in Syria with the Al-Jilani government there. Still in its infancy after the overthrow of Assad. You've got the Houthi pirates still firing ballistic missiles. Last Saturday, as Israelis were sitting trying to enjoy a peaceful Shabbat here, millions across the country had to run into shelters because a ballistic missile was fired from Yemen right towards us. It's unknown what policies could actually be realistically put in place right now. And that sort of longer term thinking, unfortunately, has fallen by the wayside as we focus on the immediacy of trying to get our people back home, trying to get the hostages of Hamas back to their loved ones. This is the critical goal in the shorter term. In the longer term, there's a wealth of possibilities, there's a wealth of options, but at the end of the day, without the will to enforce those actions, without the will to implement those policies, it doesn't mean much. And with the likes of Iran acting as a sort of sick puppeteer, pulling the strings of so many militia groups, their so-called axis of resistance that surrounded Israel and has seen, a large-scale collapse, over the course of this war, with Hezbollah obviously being taken down, Assad and others, falling. It's unknown what will happen after this, but we really do hope and pray here in Israel that clear heads remain. There is funding available for Gaza to help rebuild. There is will from the international community to help rebuild Gaza, and that would be in everyone's interests as long as it was rebuilt under clear leadership that's goal was not the explicit genocidal intent to destroy Israel as we have seen from Hamas.
No, I actually understand it completely. And so your goal is Hamas doesn't exist in any leadership capacity. What about the Palestinian Authority? I mean, would you be receptive to them taking a leadership role in Gaza?
Look, Dan, I don't want to personally speculate on the machinations of who may be in control at various times. Obviously, as you said, the Palestinian Authority is one potential actor. Whether they would be interested, willing, able, in good faith to take control of Gaza, it's a complex situation. There is a lot of moving parts on the ground at any given time. And as I said, the stakeholders are there. Again, whether we're talking about Qatar, US, the UAE, Jordan, Egypt, of course, Egypt shares a border with the Gaza Strip. They must play a pivotal role in helping to reshape this region of land, to reshape this area. I'm reminded, Dane, of hopes from way back in 2005 when Israel unilaterally withdrew from the Gaza Strip in the first place. And people spoke about Gaza becoming a Singapore of the Middle East, a small city-state that could thrive, flourish with an abundance of funding and capability and skill. Israelis used to talk and reminisce kindly of the beautiful beaches in Gaza. It was considered some of the best surf beaches in the Eastern Mediterranean. There is a lot of potential there in Gaza for hope, for development, for growth, if there is the will both within the Gazan people and, of course, from their leadership and for other international actors to ensure that happens. I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic that we can see a bright future where everyone is able to live together in some sense of, shared development and purpose. But, with so many moving parts, I would say we're very far from deciding the absolute details of what that might look like.
And so tell me, like in phase one, like what is how would I put this? What would signal that it's falling apart? Like if the international community is watching, at what point would you say, okay, well, this isn't going to happen?
I mean, frankly, and I sat, here in Tel Aviv, surrounded by friends and colleagues, waiting with bated breath to see if the original 3 hostages, released on Sunday would actually come home. And I really feel that is the key thing here. If we keep seeing the return of hostages, Israel will continue to transfer Palestinian prisoners, as I said, many of them themselves, bloodied murderers and with a large amount of blood on their hands, but Israel will continue to transfer them on the proviso that hostages are being returned, the cessation of violence, within the Gaza Strip. If Hamas keeps to that deal, then it shall continue. Israel's explicit goal is and always has been the return of its hostages. And we've said for many months now that if Hamas were willing to simply return the hostages and lay down their arms, the suffering of the Gazan people could stop. and this war could stop and we could move forward together to build some sort of functional explicit state. But this isn't Hamas's goal, and this is why Israel does not trust Hamas as a good faith actor. Their goal is to stay in power, to maintain their own power at the expense of their own people. I mean, let's be realistic here. The death of Gazans for Hamas is a feature, not a bug, because it helps them to engender sympathy, action, response from the international community that puts them back on the main stage. I mean, this whole war started in large part because Hamas was terrified of the prospect of a normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is something that, as we see now from the incoming Trump administration, is back on the cards. So, what that future may hold, what Hamas's actions and intent will be, I will not give them credit or capability for anything but their own self-interest. But in the meantime, Israel's interests and Hamas's are sadly, aligned on the goal of getting the hostages returned and hopefully keeping peace and stability and security there for the time being, at least for this first phase, as we said, hopefully for many more phases to come into the long term. This was always being aligned with Israel's interests.
Understood. And so the new Trump administration, just real quick on this, I mean, how do you see the new Trump administration playing in this? It's the positive, negative, walk us through that real quick.
I mean, I don't want to weigh in on the capacity of rating one administration over another. My goal is not to analyze the specificities of US politics and internal dealings there, but I will say that we did see an alignment of interests, it seemed, as the new Trump administration came in. Obviously, his negotiators and agents were here, the part of the administration taking part in the negotiations, which ultimately we have seen leading to this first phase of a ceasefire deal. We're hoping that continues. We're hoping that the US can, as it has done in the past, provide a guiding hand to stability, security, and help to back the credibility of certain ceasefires, and again, hopefully an eventual some semblance of peace, as it were, but also the takedown of Hamas, limiting Iran, preventing their access to a nuclear bomb, as they would so love to do, and their expansion of their access as resistance, again, as they call it. We would hope that the US could continue to provide the sort of stability that can lead to a sustained regional peace. But frankly, Dane, time will tell.
Well, listen, Asher, my heart goes out to all the families of the hostages. I wish them all well and good luck with all your efforts. And thanks again for being on the show. I appreciate it. So.